Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and I'm happy to have you with me today. So, a couple things I want to talk about before I get into today's episode. In my last episode with Bridget, we mentioned that her and I were going to be doing a couples workshop or a couples intensive, a 2-day working on skills to help the relationship, to better understand, to be able to work through conflict, all of those stuff that, all of those things that couples typically run into that they don't always know how to navigate through or to work with. So that's going to be in October. We're still firming up dates. You can watch on our website at www.healingpathsrecovery, that's paths, Paths, recovery.com. And we'll post it on there. You're also going to hear me announce the dates once we firm up those dates. So that's item number one. Item number two, I realized a couple of days ago, maybe a week or so ago, that I am going to hit episode 300 probably before the end of the year. It'll be close to the end of the year, but I'm going to hit episode 300 sometime in December. And, I thought to myself, like, I should do something special for episode 300. And I don't know what that is. I'm open to ideas. I'd love to hear from you guys. You can, reach out on our social media sites on Facebook, Instagram. It's Healing Paths Recovery Inc., I believe. Or you can find us on our YouTube channel, comment there. You can also email me at Jackie Pack, P-A-C-K. Actually, it's Jackie at JackiePack.com. So you can email me there to give me ideas if you have some ideas. I was talking to my kids about it when I realized it a couple weeks ago, I think it was, at dinner. And I asked, do you guys have any ideas about what I could do for episode 300? And I think I only had maybe 2 of my kids there because, the other 2 live on it on their own. And they both said, oh, you should totally have us on the podcast talking about what it's like to grow up with a mom who's a therapist and who specializes in sexual issues. And, I kind of laughed and was like, yeah, forget about that. But then as I started thinking about it, I thought, well, that's an idea. I'll put it out there. So that's an option. And I want to hear from listeners. What options do you think of? What do you want to hear for episode 300? So again, drop me a comment, let me know. And now let's get into this episode. So I would say for the past definitely 4 weeks, but I think it's actually 5-6 weeks. I've been seeing on a weekly basis some article put out talking about mental health treatment and insurance. And I've read all of the articles that I've seen on it. I don't know that any of the articles were telling me anything new, but I thought it would be helpful to put out a podcast episode, synthesizing some of the information that I read, also the information just based on my experience working in the field, and ultimately talking about the problems, because I think mental health treatment and insurance is a problem not just for therapists, but it's also a problem for clients. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this podcast episode. We know that searching for a therapist can be tough these days, especially if you're trying to find one who accepts your insurance. Part of the reason for this is the demand for mental health services has surged, and many therapists are overwhelmed with long wait lists. In fact, a 2023 survey by the American Psychological Association revealed that over half of therapists had no availability for new patients. And of those with wait lists, nearly 2/3 reported wait times of up to 3 months, while the rest had wait times longer than the 3 months. Now, I will say for me, I've opted not to even compile a wait list. And part of the reason for me is, I believe that if a client is reaching out for mental health treatment at that particular time and I don't have availability, they need mental health therapy at the time they're reaching out. Now, fortunately, because I own a group practice, there's usually, one or more therapists on staff that have some availability if that works and lines up with the client's availability. So I'm often talking to them about working with one of our other Healing Paths therapists. And usually, I can somehow finagle that, find the right therapist to fit their availability and get them scheduled so they can get in right away. And often I will tell them if they want to, like some of them will say, well, I particularly want to work with you, Jackie. And I will say, okay, but I don't know when I'm going to have an opening. That could be in 6 months. It could be in a year. I don't know. And so if you're looking for mental health treatment right now, if you're looking to address addiction issues or betrayal bond issues or betrayal trauma issues, then you need to be getting in with a therapist right now. And, most of our therapists get trained or are trained. Several of us are CSATs. And, most of our therapists, I think I've done the majority of their CSAT supervision and their licensing supervision. So, I will say I've trained them. They're going to work very similar to me. They might have their own unique style, their unique personality, but you're going to get the same quality of service that you would get from me, which has been really important for me as a practice owner, that our quality is the best that we can make it. So we also know, talking about these wait lists, that if you're looking for a therapist who accepts insurance, the wait can be even longer. Many therapists choose not to work with insurance companies, and I'll get into why. There are several reasons. And some of these reasons are beneficial to the client, why therapists do not work with insurance companies. So in this episode, I'm pulling information, like I said, from several different articles covering this topic, including an article published by NPR, which in the NPR article, it included information found when ProPublica dived into looking at the issue. I'm also pulling information from an article by Mental Health Match and psychology.org. So let's talk first about, does your insurance cover therapy? So whether or not your therapy sessions are covered by insurance depends entirely on your policy. Some plans cover a limited number of sessions per month or per year. They cap it. In contrast, others may only cover therapy if you've been officially diagnosed with a mental health condition like anxiety, depression, or a number of other mental health conditions. I think it's important to note that all of the diagnoses in the DSM are not covered by insurance. And unfortunately, there's many people who hit a roadblock looking for a therapist to work with who takes their insurance. Also, if you're seeking therapy to deal with life's challenges, but what you've got going on doesn't really reach the level of a diagnosis, your insurance might not be willing to cover it. And this makes it particularly difficult for people who look for couples therapy or just general mental health support when they don't meet specific criteria for a diagnosis. Because in my experience, I've never had a claim filed without applying a diagnosis. And we also know that insurance companies do not cover couples therapy. And, they have their reasons why. But in my opinion, I often see that issues in the relationship contribute to the overall mental health condition of both individuals in the relationship. Now, there are some options in the field. We refer to them as out-of-network options. So if the therapist you want to work with, or you find a therapist who specializes in an area that you are seeking treatment for, you may still have access to out-of-network benefits. Many PPO plans include partial coverage for therapists outside your insurance network. Not all insurance companies provide for out-of-network benefits, but PPO plans might cover partial coverage for a therapist outside the insurance network. So in these cases, your therapist will provide you with what's called a super bill, which is a detailed receipt that you can submit to your insurance for reimbursement. Now, you will have to pay for the session fee up front at the time of the service, and that will show on the super bill, along with other details that the insurance company needs in order to process the super bill. And then typically, your insurance company reimburses you, the client, for money that you have spent in therapy. Now, there is a lag time in that, but at least you are able to recover some of the out-of-pocket fees that you are paying. Now, while these out-of-network benefits typically don't cover the total cost of a therapy session, they can cover 60 to 80% of your therapy expenses, depending on your plan. So let's talk about why more therapists don't accept insurance. Many people feel frustrated when they find out most therapists don't accept insurance. After all, you're paying for health insurance, so why wouldn't you want to use that to save on therapy? And I want to talk about why using insurance for therapy can have downsides for both you as a client and for therapists. So first, let's talk about the downsides for clients. So the first concern that clients may have using their insurance is confidentiality concerns. Many people assume that everything discussed in therapy stays between them and their therapist. Unless, they've signed an ROI, a release of information, and the therapist has given them detailed information about who the therapist needs to talk to, what will actually be disclosed to this other person. That might include your doctor, your general practitioner, if they're prescribing medication. It could include a psychiatric visit if you're going there. Different things like that sometimes therapists need an ROI in order to help navigate and help you navigate what's going on for you. But that confidentiality between you and your therapist changes when insurance is involved. Therapists must submit a diagnosis and treatment details to insurance companies in order to get paid. And this opens the door for more individuals to have access to your private information, which compromises the confidentiality that many expect in therapy. In many ways, this undermines the basic premise of therapy and also gives a lot more people access to private health information about you. Now, not all insurance companies are the same, and some want way more details than other insurance companies. Sometimes putting therapists in an awkward situation, and that I'll talk about in a minute. So if this is news to you that confidentiality might be compromised, you're not alone. It is written into the HIPAA document that you get when you start therapy or you go to any doctor's office, but most people don't read all the fine print or understand what that means. Now, again, while it would be rare to have to disclose a mental health diagnosis for job purposes in certain professions, such as governmental positions, security positions, this might become an issue. The second issue that I feel like using insurance creates for clients is higher insurance premiums. So when your therapist provides your diagnosis to your insurance company, again, that's what they have to do in order to get paid by the insurance company, there can be future implications. This diagnosis becomes part of your health record and can label you with a pre-existing condition, which may lead to increased insurance premiums when renewing or switching plans. So I feel like those are the two issues that might be downsides to clients using therapy to cover mental health treatment. But let's also talk about, from the therapist angle, why many therapists just refuse to work with insurance companies. So to understand the forces that drive even the most well-intentioned therapists from insurance networks. The article by NPR states that ProPublica plunged into a problem that most often is explored in statistics and one-off perspectives. Reporters spoke to hundreds of providers in nearly all 50 states, from both rural communities to big cities. And the interviews underscore how the nation's insurers have quietly and with minimal pushback from lawmakers and regulators assumed an outsized role in mental health care. So often the insurers, not the therapist, determine who can get treatment, what kind they can get, and for how long. Ironically, often those who work for the insurance company and decide which therapy methods can be used are usually not even therapists. And they certainly haven't personally met and assessed the client like their therapist has. Now, many people are aware of the Goldwater rule. Let me just summarize if you're forgetting what that means. So the Goldwater rule is an ethical guideline that states that psychiatrists should not provide a professional opinion about a person without conducting an examination with consent and authorization. And this came about when Goldwater was running for president. And, they just knew that if mental health therapists, if psychiatrists started weighing in and diagnosing from afar by watching what they were observing, that could really start to skew people's perspectives. And they didn't find that was fair or ethical, which I agree with. And so the rule has held that unless you're actually meeting with a person and conducting that assessment, and they know that you're conducting an assessment, then otherwise you can't do that without their consent for you to do that. But I find it puzzling that insurance panels or their committees are given authority to determine the type of treatment, how long it should last, whether or not this diagnosis applies to you. And they also can determine when clients no longer need therapy. More than a dozen therapists in the NPR article said insurers urged them to reduce care when their patients were on the brink of harm, including being suicidal. Meanwhile, mental health providers struggled to stay in business as insurers withheld reimbursements that often come months late. Some therapists spend hours a week chasing down these meager payments, listening to hold music, and sending faxes into the abyss. Yes, you heard me right. We still have to send faxes. Oftentimes, too, I've been told by insurance companies that they use mail. And when I'm saying, like, you can't email it, you can't fax it, no, we send email. I don't remember which insurance company this was, but years ago, before I started Healing Paths, I was working at a different agency. And, under that agency, we were providers with this one insurance company that just seemed to overly be involved in the case. Like on a regular basis, probably every 3 months, I had to do a phone call with them. It felt like prove why this client needed continued therapy sessions. And one of the times they were going to send me out a document, and they said, our mail goes out every other Friday. So they had to mail it to me. And then they said, our mail goes out every other Friday. And the person I was talking to wasn't sure if that Friday was the Friday that mail went out or if it would be the next. And on the phone, I paused. I was puzzled. I said, did you say that your mail goes out every other Friday? Yes. Our outgoing mail is every other Friday. And I kind of jokingly said, like, you realize the post office at that time delivers mail and picks up mail 5 days a week, right? Or 6 days a week, right? You realize that? And, she didn't say anything. She was just like, we have outgoing mail every other Friday. Okay, that seems a little bit like an intentional delay when it's not necessary. Now, several insurers, so insurance companies, told ProPublica that they are committed to ensuring access to mental health providers, emphasizing that their plans comply with state and federal laws. Insurers also said they have practices in place to ensure that reimbursement rates reflect market value and to support and retain providers for whom they continually recruit. I have read in a few articles that when insurance companies are pushed to disclose their reports that assess this information, their reimbursement rates that reflect the market value and support providers in staying paneled, they're often told that those reports are confidential and that they simply cannot show the reports that they're using to determine the reimbursement fee. ProPublica also reported being told that the insurance company is, quote, committed to ensuring members have access to care consistent with the terms of their health plans, end quote. So just note there that that's not care that is consistent with recommended treatment protocols, but it's consistent with the client's health plan. That's a problem. When therapists take insurance, they are required to use treatment methods that are covered by your plan. This often means they have less say in how to treat you based on your specific and individual needs. Although insurers are legally required to cover mental health, just like physical health, there's a catch. Many insurance companies delay or deny mental health coverage, limiting who gets treatment, what kind of treatment they get, and how long they can access it. And yeah, I know that insurance for medical issues can also get denied. I've had to call my provider's office before and ask them to recode or add a code so that the insurance pays for a medical claim. So I'm not saying that it doesn't happen with medical insurance claims, but I do think that it happens to a higher degree with mental health claims. And the fact that it happens with either mental health or physical health insurance is because our insurance companies are for profit and for substantial profit at that. Some therapists have shared stories about insurers pressuring them to reduce care, even for patients in crisis. They also faced months-long delays in reimbursements, adding financial stress on top of providing care for clients. Now, in addition to cutting off therapy, they are pressuring providers to cap the length of their session to 45 minutes, even when the patients require more time. Now, historically, I've been in the field for about 30 years. The clinical hour, and I know it's still taught in grad schools, the clinical hour is considered a 50-minute session. And then that allows you, 10 minutes to do your notes, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do in that time. And now they're wanting to reduce that to 45 minutes. Now, I've said this before. I've known other therapists who say before, it's hard to get done what I need to in 50 minutes. Now they're asking me to shave off another 5 minutes. So another term that I think is important to understand is CPT codes. CPT codes stand for current procedural terminology, and it offers doctors and healthcare professionals a uniform language for coding medical services and procedures in order to streamline reporting and increase accuracy and efficiency. So I also want to say here, this goes along, even if I don't have an insurance client, in order for me to enter what I need to in my billing system, I'm using those CPT codes. Starting this year, in December of 2024, professionals who are required to use these CPT codes, which again, let me just restate, we don't have a choice. We are required to use these CPT codes. And now clinicians must pay royalties to the American Medical Association because they created the codes that we are required to use. Now, therapists that I have interacted with often are reporting that they're receiving clawbacks for exceeding the limited amounts of 90837 sessions. So the CPT code here would be a 90837, what that translates to is that is a 50-minute mental health session. Versus a 45-minute session, which the CPT code is a 90834. And many of these therapists that I've talked to have said their contract didn't state that there was any limit on the number of 90837 sessions that they could provide, or 50-minute sessions that they could provide. And for therapists who have been in the field for a while, we are used to a 50-minute session. Now, I've had clients, or if I'm working with couples, I often find that 50 minutes just is not effective. We have to be doing a 2-hour session, an hour and a half session, something like that. That's not going to happen usually with insurance companies. They're not going to cover those sessions. The idea is that if you make it so frustrating for providers to follow up on these claims that are being denied, they're simply going to give up and the insurance company doesn't have to pay out. For many therapists, accepting insurance is simply financially unsustainable. Insurance reimbursement rates for mental health professionals are often much lower than for medical providers, rarely increasing over time. If you take 2 in-network clinicians, meaning these are providers for this particular insurance plan, so if you spend an office visit talking about depression with your psychiatrist, and then you have the same conversation with a physician's assistant, an insurer could pay the physician's assistant nearly 20% more than the psychiatrist, despite psychiatrists receiving medical school training. And this is according to rates set by Medicare, which insurance companies look to when setting their own rates. Despite federal rules requiring equitable access to care, there are no requirements to even out provider reimbursements. I had a conversation several years ago with somebody who was a medical professional, just in my personal life. And we were just talking about billing codes and different things like that. And, one of the things that he wasn't taking into account is that as a medical professional, he often was booking 6 to 8 patients in an hour, possibly more, whereas therapists are limited to seeing 1 client per hour. Now, providers, sure, we could join forces to fight for better pay, but antitrust laws and insurer contracts forbid providers from collectively setting fees, which also limits them talking to one another about how much they make. So on average, insurance companies pay therapists around $98 for a 45-minute session. Out-of-network therapists can earn more than double that, meaning if you're not on insurance panels, the average rate of a mental health session, at the highest amount I've heard is $350 an hour. The lowest I've usually heard is around $130, $140 a session. Again, it varies if you're in a rural community or a urban big city. Some of those things vary depending on what the going rate is. But those are significantly higher rates than the $98 for a 45-minute session. And then you factor in overhead costs such as office rent, malpractice insurance, administrative support. All of that can make it hard for in-network therapists to simply stay afloat. We know that reimbursement rates are primarily stagnant and they're notoriously low. Dozens of providers told ProPublica their reimbursement rates have barely shifted in years. Like I'm talking in 20, 25 years, those reimbursement rates haven't increased. And yet you don't have to work in the field long to know that your malpractice insurance rates have increased, that your rent has increased, that insurance or your internet fees have increased. I think it was as of 2015, therapists were required to do everything electronically. So, that required therapists getting on what's called an electronic health record. So, it is effective. It is efficient, I would say, at keeping all of the information in one place. And, I've worked in the field long enough that I remember having, 6 inches to a foot of a file on a client that I had transferred to my caseload. So it's a lot more efficient to keep it electronically and digitally, but that's an additional cost. So, like I was saying, the overhead of running a private practice can be substantial. And insurance companies pay only for your time in the session. They don't pay for documenting notes or chasing down payments from the insurance company. Now, almost every state has a law that requires insurance companies to quickly reimburse for treatment claims. But the strength and enforcement of those laws vary greatly. And providers said they sometimes had to wait years to get paid. That was my experience. We used to take as a, kind of as a thank you to the veterans, we used to take the VA's insurance. We were providers for the VA insurance. It pays extremely low reimbursement rates. And there were times that, they would simply tell us, we've reached our budget for the year. Depending on where you are in, priority, you may get paid next year. I've, collected 2-3 years down the road. And, when I contact the former client, letting them know we did get payment, often they've been deployed to different areas and moved to 2 different bases. Insurance companies can also take back money, even if it was them that made the mistake. And often we're starting to figure out that these are computer-generated denials and what we call clawbacks. So again, we may have electronically set up to file claims, and all of the information is there that needs to be pulled. The system does that automatically. Let's say we've filed 10 insurance claims and the insurance is paid on them. And then all of a sudden we get a claim or 2 that gets denied. Why? Well, we don't know. We don't know why it got denied. So, often I haven't talked about this either, but often private practices are hiring somebody to help them manage the insurance claims simply because they don't have the time to do that themselves. They're busy seeing clients. They're busy running their practice. They're busy doing these other things. And they don't have time to wait on hold for an hour only to be found out that, oh, you needed to talk to a different department. Or what this person told you contradicts what that person told you. So, we have to make that call, figure out why that claim was denied, and then resubmit the claim. We also sometimes receive clawbacks. So this is a session that was had, service was provided, the insurance paid on the session, and then, 6 months, a year, I've had up to 2 years, I get a note from the insurance company saying, hey, these claims should not have been paid and you owe us this amount of money to be returned by this date. Now, occasionally I have called the insurance company and I've verified. Why? Because, they had insurance at the time. I was a provider. I did provide the service. I have a note for it. Why are you now denying payment for that service? And I've even been told oh yeah, those are just computer generated. So if you're a therapist and you just pay that money back to the insurance company because you don't have time or money for an insurance company to come after you for that money, then they get their money back for that session that you had with the client, and now you're just not going to get paid for. Now, many states generally limit an insurance company from clawing back these payments if it's more than 2 years after a claim is paid. But about 10 states have no restrictions for this. About 2 years ago, I had one of Rachel's clients. We were providing super bills for him. And, eventually he knew about what he was getting reimbursed for, how much his insurance company was willing to pay. But he called me and was like, how come I'm having to pay so much? What does my insurance company cover? So I looked it up in our system and I said, oh, your insurance company pays $42.37 for a session. And because we weren't providers for that plan, we could then bill him the remaining balance between what his insurance paid and what the fee was for that therapist. And he laughed and he was like, "That's all they're paying?" And, I kind of said, "Yep, that's what they're paying for this claim." And he was just like, "Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous." Like, "Okay, thank you for answering my question. No problem." He wasn't upset, but of course he's wondering why he's paying so much. Last year, our clinic was dealing with cash flow issues, different issues that were going on that, I really haven't had, I wouldn't say to a high level, since I got my business divorce in like early 2014. And this was causing me some extreme stress, I would say. At one point, I was questioning if I even knew how to run a business. Like maybe I had just been lucky for 12 years. And I was talking with my husband, and, he told me how ridiculous my train of thought was and pointed out that nobody's that lucky for 12 years, which, of course, he was right. And I also made a phone call to a friend of mine who, understands business and can give really good feedback and kind of hear what problems I'm having and then kind of guide me into how to manage that, how to, figure out what the issues are, put my finger on that, and then how to start fixing them. So I was lucky that I had, two people who were kind of like, "Yeah, I wouldn't pay attention to that line of thinking, and here's how you're going to come back from that." So I was trying to audit what had changed in the company, what the problems were, and what the impact on the company was. And, I found several things. One, the amount of insurance clients that our therapists were taking had drastically increased. And that doesn't line up with our business model. I believe that therapists should get a decent pay and they should have manageable caseloads, because if you do not have a manageable caseload, you're not going to do the best work. And that's going to compromise the quality of services that the clients get. And that was never my intention. So as I started to notice that we had far more insurance clients than we did out-of-pocket clients, that started to make sense with part of our cash flow issue. Now, also, last year and earlier this year, there were 2 cyber attacks on insurance companies that, they had to disconnect from the system, and they weren't even processing claims. They weren't even accepting claims. And, for us, that caused, like, typically from the time we have a session, insurance companies are paying about 6 weeks after the session. And at this point, they were paying 3 months after the session, sometimes 3.5 months after the session. I knew some therapists, on the East Coast, in the Midwest, who went 6 months without getting payment. Now, again, they were on a lot more insurance panels than we were. And so the disruption caused by the cyber attack was somewhat minimal for us, but it affected enough clients that significantly caused some cash flow issues. Like I was saying, with insurance companies, there's already a delay in when the payment comes in. And, we can set it up in our system to do an auto pay, which means, the system automatically charges the card on file at like 12, sometime after midnight the next day. But also our system is not set up to charge copays unless the therapist manually enters the copay and bills the copay at the time of the session. So for some of these claims, we weren't getting payment for even the copay, let alone the session fee, for months. And that's going to back things up, and that's going to cause some cash flow issues. And then the other issue that we had is, so the EHR system that we use uses Stripe to process all of the payments. And typically, I've used the same EHR system for probably 6 years. And there's always like a 2-day processing fee. So, clients that I see on Tuesday, usually the money from those sessions show up in the bank account on Thursday. And all of a sudden that went to 4 days. So clients I'm seeing on Tuesday are showing up on Monday of the next week. That's a problem. Like, that's going to impact the cash flow. So I was processing this. I was trying to come up with a plan to address it. How are we going to, get back on track? And, I came across a Facebook post in one of the therapy groups that I'm in for therapists. And there was a post from a woman up in, I think she was up in Washington, Oregon, one of those states. She was up in the Pacific Northwest. And so she said, "Hey, I have a question. I'm set to graduate in May. So May of 2024. And she said, I was talking to my supervisor who offered me a position, but the starting fee is $35 a session. And she was like, I can't afford childcare at making $35 a session. Now, again, there's some differences in what pay looks like on the East Coast or even in California versus the Midwest, different things like that. So she was just like, for therapists on the West Coast, minus California, I'm interested in knowing what you pay new graduates. And there were 228 comments on this post when I saw it. And I read every single one because in my mind, I was thinking, there is no way that you're paying somebody who graduates with their master's $35 an hour. Now, for a point of reference, in 1999, I got a different position, part-time, because I was having kids. But, it was one of the higher paying positions that I could take. And they were paying $34 a session. Now, I will say during the time that I was there, we did have a pay decrease. So it went from $34 a session to $32 a session. But still, I thought that was a pretty good amount of pay. And I was happy with that amount of pay. So for me to look back to 1999 and know that I was at one point making 34, then 32, and to think that in 2023, many practices are offering new graduates with a master's degree $35 a session. Like, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine hiring somebody new and saying, this is what I'll pay you, and having them take the job. Now, the other thing that I found, which of course I knew, but they were saying this. So let me just be clear. Every comment, all 228 that I read, said, yes, this is what we pay new graduates. Not one comment was like, that seems a little low, which it did to me. That's not what I pay new graduates. But many of them were also saying, you're going to graduate and get a job in a practice that takes a lot of insurance, and insurance pays notoriously low. And so you're going to have to see a lot of clients in a week, and you're also going to have a lower fee because the reimbursement rate is so low. So that's what you're going to find. But that's how you're going to get experience. That's how you're going to find clients, is going on insurance panels. So yeah, that's what you're going to pay. And I did see two therapists in Utah also comment and also stated, yes, that is what we pay new graduates. And here are the reasons why. So, coming back after the holiday break at the end of 2023 and starting the new year, I had to have some difficult conversations with staff about our business model and why we were facing the issues we were. Things like the cyber attacks, the insurance clients were higher than we typically have been. And then, just the delay in payment, even for the copay. And then talking about, like, here's the history of our practice. And, when I first started the practice with a business partner, we were on quite a few insurance panels. And I will say, if you're a new therapist or you're starting a new practice, that is one way that you're going to get referrals, and that's how you're going to fill up your clinicians. And so we did that. And we made it work. Now, once we had started to establish ourselves, that we weren't business partners long before it all went really, really bad. And I ended up saying, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't stay in this business partnership, and got out. And at that point, I think I stayed with one of the insurance companies, and I went off all of the other ones. And I stayed on that one for a little bit. And then I think it was in 2015 when Obamacare was going to go into effect. That is when it was then required that all insurance companies, or that insurance companies had to cover mental health treatment just like they did physical health or medical health. That, because prior to that, some people, their insurance company or their insurance plan included no coverage for mental health treatment. And so that was going into effect, I believe, in 2015. And so what we saw in 2014 was a lot of insurance companies, even the ones that, like the one that I stayed on, that had better reimbursement rates than the other ones. I'm talking like between the reimbursement rate from the insurance company and the copay, I might be collecting around the $98. I might be collecting $110, $113, something like that. So even the insurance companies who had better rates, and I will say there are some insurance companies who have better reimbursement rates. However, they have multiple plans. And so depending on the plan that the client has, you're not going to be receiving those higher reimbursement rates for all of your therapists or for all of your clients who are on that insurance panel. Some of those are half of what you might be paying or getting reimbursed for at the higher level. But what I saw in 2014 was even the insurance companies who had better reimbursement rates were dropping them significantly. And so I went off all the insurance plans. I think at that point, like I said, we were only on one, but we went off of that one too. And I was just like, I can't make that work. Now, ethically, I do believe that mental health treatment should be accessible, not just to the wealthy, not just those who can afford to pay it out of pocket, but mental health treatment should be accessible. And, it just, I think sometimes because of the way the insurance companies are structured, sometimes it's not accessible to everybody. So we were off of all insurance companies until the pandemic hit. And what we saw then was for most of my staff, the amount of clients who they were seeing significantly reduced. Like there was probably a 2/3 drop in their weekly sessions. Now, I felt like for me, I had clients coming back. So I don't think I stopped seeing any clients. And I had older clients that had stopped therapy coming back in 2022. So I was working even more hours, and we're locked down. So it's on Zoom, all of the sessions. It's tiring. You have to work harder online. And so, but I was also panicking about how do I get clients for the rest of the staff? Because, if they're not getting a decent pay, are they going to stay? Again, it wasn't my fault they weren't getting a decent pay. It wasn't my fault their clients dropped. But, that's a concern that as a group practice owner, you deal with. And so we went on 2 insurance companies. Now that took about a year to get paneled with both insurance companies. And most clinicians will state this, that you have to hire a third party to simply help you walk through the process of how to get paneled or to become in network with your insurance provider. Because I don't know, they make it very difficult to get paneled. I don't know why it would take that long, but it does take that long. So it took me, like I said, the better part of a year, maybe like 10 months. And And I had to hire a third-party company to simply help me do that. I had started on my own thinking, how hard can it be? Well, much harder than I anticipated. Now, in 2020, when we were going back on some insurance plans, I did find that, the companies who had dropped their reimbursement rates in 2014, they had gone back to about where they were in prior to the ACA going into effect. And again, like I said, while legally it is required for insurance companies to provide mental health care the same way they do medical care, it's not all equally accessible. So, why do some clinicians stay paneled with insurance? Well, one of the things, like I was saying, is it's much easier to get clients when you're taking insurance. You're just not going to get paid very well. And I will say it, if you're not a great therapist and you're in private practice, you're probably going to need to take insurance just to get your weekly sessions, because it's hard to get clients when you're not doing much marketing, which a lot of therapists are not doing marketing. And if you're not able to really keep those clients because you're not doing really great, effective work. Now, I understand the difficulty for many people to see self-pay therapists. In my family currently, I'm in therapy, my husband is in therapy, and 2 of our daughters are in therapy. And none of our therapists take insurance. So these are all self-pay therapists. Professional organizations and advocacy groups are working to address the crux of this issue, reimbursement. If reimbursement rates improve, more therapists would be willing to work with insurers, and wait times for therapy would eventually shorten. The American Psychological Association has been asking relevant government associations to change policies surrounding reimbursement. It's also helping psychologists get paid for all the qualifying services by educating them on the current procedural terminology codes that are currently available, making it so that maybe we could charge for more than one CPT code in a session. Right now, we are limited to charging for one CPT code per session. At the state level, advocacy organizations are pushing for better reimbursement rates, but this depends on your state. For example, in Oregon, COPACT, the legislative arm of the state's counseling association, helped to draft House Bill 3046. This bill addresses practices that have driven many counselors and therapists away from insurance panels. And other states are making similar moves. But these changes are happening very slowly, as you can imagine. As mental health stigma continues to diminish, policies that force therapists to justify coverage of mental health care continually will face increasing criticism. Advocacy groups and professional organizations are pushing for better reimbursement rates. And there is hope that the system will improve. Ultimately, everyone seeking mental health care should be able to get it without facing months-long waits or financial burdens, or having the length of time that they can access mental health treatment shortened. And while dealing with these challenges can be frustrating for both clients and therapists, some promising changes are on the horizon. With continued advocacy, insurance companies may raise their reimbursement rates, making therapy more accessible for all. But even as more therapists enter the field, they still need to make a living. The key is balancing fair compensation with the urgent need for mental health support. No one should be left without the help they need, especially when mental health is as important as physical health. So here's to a future where accessing therapy is more manageable for everyone. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.